Hi everyone, this is a quick lecture recording for both of my 107 classes around language and literacy development. Both classes were running a little bit behind, and with holidays coming up and different things, I want to make sure that I can give you guys enough background information for and do some of the lecture via recording that you can watch on your own throughout the week. And then that way, when we come to class, we can focus on developing those lesson plans around each of the developmental areas. And I'm also hoping to possibly show some foundational videos for each of the different developmental domains that we're going to cover, and thinking maybe that's going to help us out a little bit. So today's video tutorial is for language and literacy development. So I am going to quickly screen share with you guys. And I have over here my PowerPoint for this topic, and we're going to go ahead and run through a little bit of language and literacy development. So we already talked about our developmental area. The first area that we focused on was social emotional development. And if you remember, that big topic area is what we call a developmental domain. So now this next developmental domain that we want to focus on is foundations in language and literacy. So of course, this is also a really big topic and is embedded in everything that we do every day with children. Everything we do is related to the development of language and all of the components to language, but also literacy, which is reading and writing. So language and literacy foundations address a wide range of specific competencies, again, that preschool or young children need as a foundation in all of the other learning that they're going to encounter throughout their life. So this is a really important foundation, and we want them going into kindergarten ready to build on this foundation, and then being able to go to first grade and second grade and so on and so forth, and really continue to build and develop their language and literacy skills. So the language and literacy foundations have 3 substrands to them. And again, I want to remind you that substrands always are what end in 0. So for language and literacy developmental domain, the 3 substrands are listening and speaking. And those are the substrands that take care of what we would call the language part. And then the literacy part of this domain would be the other 2 substrands, and that would be reading and writing. So let's look at listening and speaking first. So listening and speaking, and I'm going to move my little box down here so you guys can see better. Literacy and speaking is all about children's use of language and the conventions that go with that, exposure and use of vocabulary, and then also understanding how to use those words in what we would call then grammar. So we have to be able to understand each of these different parts to listening and speaking, so that way we can formulate opportunities in our classrooms that support each of these different substrands. And then of course, within inside of each of those, there are foundations. So it's really important that we think about these everyday types of experiences that give us the opportunity that we can work and model for children appropriate use of language and grammar, and then also vocabulary. Now, some of these things, just like social emotional development, some things are just about us correcting and modeling for children. And then other times we can actually set up and build activities around some of these areas. And one of those particularly would be vocabulary. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can introduce and use a variety of words to children, or for children, throughout the classroom, and we can come up with lots of different activities that have different, vocabulary in them, and You could do picture matching with words and different things like that, but also reading really good children's literature, good children's books that are going to have a lot of vocabulary, a lot of new and different types of, colorful words, lots of verbs and things like that. It's really, really important. And that is where I do stress with you guys, is that we have to think about children's literature in a quality way around these different areas for the development of listening and speaking in terms of development of language. So when you are selecting children's books, it's really important that you read them. You don't just buy them because they're in the children's section. You don't just buy them because of what it looks like on the front and that you think it looks cute and children would probably like to read that. You want to actually open it up, read through the book yourself, and really think about some of these pieces. How are they using language? Are there plays on words? Is there a wide range of vocabulary that's inside this book? And of course, are there beautiful illustrations and things like that? We also want to think about the quality in terms of that. So we typically try to stay away from what we call popular culture type books. Clifford the Big Red Dog and Max and Ruby and those types of things. Those are okay to read at home with your children. Any book that a parent sits down and reads with their children is great. It's better than not reading at all, right? But when we're in a classroom setting, we want to make sure that we are working toward our goals, and our goals are our foundation. So when we are picking out the books that we are reading and introducing to children, or that we have out on our shelf available to them, we want to make sure that they're quality and that they're hitting the intention of focusing on these foundations for language development, listening, speaking, all of the pieces that we would be working in here. So let's move on to our next area, our next strand of language and literacy development, and that would be around reading. So I'm gonna move this, I apologize. So reading is broken down into 5 substrands, and those are concepts about print, phonological awareness, alphabetic and word print recognition, comprehension and analysis of age-appropriate text, and then literacy, interest, and response. So this is, of course, reading is a really, really big component to this developmental domain and to what we are doing every day in our classrooms with children. So what I want you to take away from this, though, is that it has to go beyond us just sitting children down in a group time and just reading a story. We have to go deeper than that. So it's really important that we, again, understand each of these substrands and then look at the foundations inside of each of those substrands and build our experiences around those. So yes, we want to read to children every day, and actually a good quality classroom should have at minimum 2 opportunities that you are reading to the entire group. So a lot of programs fall short on that. They typically do that morning group time where they do a bunch of greetings and things like that, and then read a story, and then they forget about it again. And so typically you want to try to incorporate a second potential group reading. Maybe at that point, if everybody can't come to it, that's okay. I did a second group time at the end of the day as children were starting to leave and go home for the day. I would gather all of them. That way it gave us the opportunity to kind of tidy up, clean our room, and it stayed clean. And then I could just be reading stories and doing fun group things like that. And it didn't disrupt the entire classroom as children were starting to go home. And then when their parents came, they could just get up and leave. So of course, throughout the day though, we also have lots of other little times where we might individually read to children. Maybe they're sitting over in the book area, and it's okay. And it's great for teachers to be able to stop over there, sit down, read a story to 2 or 3 children. and then, you know, go to another area of the room, and maybe you have some kind of literacy or language active, you know, set up over there and participating that way. So it's really important that we read to children throughout the entire day as much as we possibly can. And that means taking books outside too. I always had a set of books that stayed outside. Obviously, I kept to them in containers, things like that, so they wouldn't get damaged or weathered. But then I would pull them out and we'd open them up, and I always had books available outside as well. So it's really important that we think about all the different ways we can incorporate it. But it's important that children see print, know what it looks like, and part of seeing print then is also seeing the alphabet. And so that is also where another one of these substrands comes in with that alphabetic and word print recognition. So children have to start understanding that the words and the language that they are using and speaking and hearing now actually take on a physical form, the written form, and that we see it in print and in a variety of different ways in print. And when it's all put together, these letters, they make up words, and then those words make up sentences, which are stories, which are parts of stories and parts of how we talk and communicate. So this is a big step and a big concept that children are going to start to develop around 3 years of age on into 5. So it's, again, important that we know these so that we can build them into our classroom. So these are some examples of ways that you can incorporate word and print recognition throughout your classroom, in addition to when you're reading them books and stories and pointing to the words as you're reading and that type of stuff. And then, of course, as we're reading to children, it's really important that we have interest and that we make it wondrous and engaging. And that is where we incorporate, while we're reading books, additional materials to go with it. And we would call that an enhancement. And so those enhancements are going to be things like puppets, felt pieces, you know, the characters from the book, something that's tangible and fun for them to use. And that creates some of this interest that then will get that response and engagement in the literacy experience or activity. And then as we're reading those stories, it's really important that we stop and we can look at and ask them questions to see if they are comprehending and being able to analyze what's happening in the story. And so it's important that while we read, we get to a point where we can incorporate questions and intentionally ask those questions so that we can gauge their comprehension. But then also we can do activities after the story that also do that as well. And so we can have out the book and some paper and markers or pens or whatever, and ask them to retell their favorite part of the story, or could they draw a favorite part of the story, or could they draw the part where so-and-so in the story was feeling sad? What did that look like? You know, those kinds of things. And so it's helping them to comprehend and also be able to retell that story so that we can make sure that they understand it and they're analyzing it. So again, this is where knowing not just the substrand, but then again, we have to look at the actual foundations, which is in that foundation book in more detail. And you'll be doing that as you develop those lesson plans. So those are just some ideas to kind of help you in thinking about this first lesson plan. And then the last part of this developmental domain is writing. So again, writing is a piece connected to literacy along with reading. We want to be competent in being able to read and write, right? That's being literate. And so writing is the last substrand here. And writing only, strand. Writing only has one substrand, and that substrand is writing strategies. So if you look at this screen and all of these different images that I have across the screen here, you will see, and I'm going to move my video over, you will see that these are a variety of ways that we can actually see writing and writing strategies starting to happen and take place. So there's lots of different ways that you can incorporate writing throughout your classroom. So of course, the easiest way is to have a writing area, writing desk, writing station, whatever you want to call it. And that area should always be filled with a variety of different type of tools and materials that support and help children in writing. And so you can fill these things up with alphabet letters, of course, because you want them to have that reference. And of course, by doing that, you're also hitting that other area of print conventions, right? And alphabetic word print recognition, right? And so you want to have some cards or images of the alphabet somewhere. You'll also see it back here on this wall. Lots of books that have different words in them. Different tools, dry erase boards, markers, different sized pens. This is Etch-a-Sketch boards. There's lots of these things are so fun. I always had these out, especially for children at nap time who woke up early. I would pull out these Etch-a-Sketch boards and we could draw, write, work on some of our letters very informally while we were quiet and waiting for the rest of the class to wake up. So lots of ways to slide these opportunities in. Obviously at writing desks, having notebooks, or you see over here, you can have journals for each child. That is also really popular in a writing area. So maybe you don't have it here, but you see how this classroom has hung these here, and children can take those down at any time, go over and be able to journal. It's a great way to get children to start writing and seeing writing in a useful way. And that should be something that's always open to them. It should never be closed. You want them to feel free to go in and write or draw and express themselves at any time. Also, to make it a little more fun and again, engaging, then we're going to do things like this. You'll see it here in this image with the mailbox. You know, they can send notes to each other and put it in the little mailbox. They can write letters and notes to their family and their friends, and they can put those into their backpacks or their cubbies, and they love that kind of stuff. And so if you can have little cards or pieces of paper, I always had envelopes. We all get those envelopes or things that come in the mail, and it comes with like an extra envelope. And nowadays, a lot of us pay our things online, and so we never use those and we throw those envelopes away. Oh, save those and drop them off to any school. They will thank you. So ask for donations like that, collections from your teacher, your co-teachers, but also parents, and get them involved in collecting things like that, or trying to keep those at home so that children can maybe write a note at home back over to you, and it gets brought to the school. Things like that to encourage, to make it fun. And an example of different writing utensils at a writing center, you can have big, thick, chunky crayons and pencils, but also start working on the narrow ones too, because it's all about refining these muscle skills, these motor skills, in order to work with writing. So we're going to talk about fine motor development when we talk about physical development in a little more detail, but it is a very important part of writing. So anything that we do that is about our fine motor muscle skills, this is all connected to emergent writing. So any kind of activity that will help with that. So that's going to include something like these boards over here. So we have these dressing boards, and that also falls under another area of development with health and being able to dress ourselves and things like that, and independence. But to be able to do some of these skills, and this is why children being able to dress themselves is so important, is we want them zipping up their own clothes and doing their own buttons, because again, it engages these fine motor muscles, and that is needed for writing. So anytime you have these kinds of opportunities or activities in your classroom, we want to be able to connect that to a writing skill. So when somebody comes in and says, well, why do you guys do beading, or why do you do this, or have these dressing boards and blah, blah, blah. What is the point? You want to be able to say it's an emergent writing skill. So you'll see some different images here as well for different, how also using different materials for like painting as well at the art easel. It's important to have a variety and different sizes because again, these motor muscles and being able to use and coordinate those paint brushes is all connected to emergent writing. So we want to make sure that we understand that connection and that we're building in lots of opportunities in our classroom. When children have the skill and they have this developed, then they're going to feel more confident and be more engaged in trying out some of these activities. So this is one of my favorite things to show you guys. I love this, but this is actually, so there are page protectors. A lot of you have used them in reports and things like that over time, and they're plastic and you can slide your paper in. That is all this is a teacher has taken a blank piece of paper, slid that into a page protector and taped the page protector down onto the desk. And then it becomes a homemade dry erase board. So this is another great opportunity or way that you can entice children and engage them in writing strategies and coming to the writing desk and being interested in it. So, and it's cheap, a lot cheaper than buying a dry erase board. So that is just another example. So I have a couple other images here that I'll go over very quickly. Variety of different children's books. Of course, we want to think about the quality of the literature that we're putting out in the classroom and thinking with the intention of that vocabulary, use of grammar, and use of the language itself. And so think about that when we're selecting those children's books, but also some great additional ways to look at writing, but then also this literacy piece is in having it in a variety of ways throughout your classroom. One of my favorite ways to do this is recipes. And so we tie in cooking, and cooking's connection is also part of science, and we'll talk about that. But when you are cooking and you doing recipes, you have to follow steps. So it's another way that children can see the use of those print conventions and how important they are. And so if you can write that in or create activities in your classroom where you have lists of recipes, or you've created them, you've got the image that goes with the words, children can work and build a recipe book. So again, it's enticing and engaging children in these literacy activities and making it more fun. And I love this example where they did a cooking experience, and they made pretzel dough, and they did it in letters and numbers. And so it's just another way to, again, engage children and make this interesting and fun. And so I've done the same kind of thing, but we did it with Play-Doh. So there's lots of different ways. But again, whenever you incorporate vocabulary and written word visually for children, it's so important. And so labeling of everything in your classroom, and then giving them lots of opportunities for them to see your print, but also their attempts at print is also very important. So these are some examples from my classroom, actually, one of my old classrooms. This is a picture of part of our writing desk. This was actually a toddler classroom. And so I always had the alphabet with images because, again, they're much younger, but starting to expose them to that. I always had clipboards with blank paper, and then a variety of utensils and tools for them, not utensils, writing tools for them to try out and explore with and see how they work, what they feel like, the different textures, how to use them and manipulate their hand. It's all about the exposure. And so I always had those things there. And then we always had, again, a variety of how print was used and shown in our classroom. And so this is an example on the far right bottom here of how we would take menus from restaurants. You know, you can print them offline now, but you can get them at restaurants. I would laminate them and then incorporate those into the play area. Always had clipboards in the block area when doing construction so they could, you know, be writing down measurements and things like that. How tall is our building? Well, we got to write that down. And so incorporating it in every area of the classroom, but then being able to facilitate children to it and say, oh, so when we were playing in the playhouse area and I would play with them, they would come and ask me, oh, what do you want to eat? And I'd say, well, I don't know. What do you have? Do you have something that maybe lists all the food and you can show me what you would make and tell me what the prices is? And I need to know a description of what is that? I don't know what's in chicken noodle soup or, you know, whatever. And they'd go get the menus and then I'd read it and say, oh, well, now this sounds really good. And then I'd read it off and I'd say, oh, do you have everything for that? And they'd say, oh, I don't know if we can make that. And I'd say, well, let's read what the description of that is. Well, it's got bread. Do you have bread? And they'd go find bread. Oh, it has ham in it. It's a ham and cheese sandwich. And we'd break it down and I'd show them where everything was. And so I just naturally incorporate that into your play with them. But you do that by having some kind of tool like this that helps you. And then my co-teacher and I always did this. We did it every day. Is we used big poster paper like this, and we always asked the children some type of question every day. And it usually had to do with a project that we were working on in the class, part of our curriculum. But sometimes it just came up from conversations that we had. So we had a conversation one morning while we were having our morning breakfast snack. Children were talking about eggs, and some saying they liked them, something they didn't, and then some saying how they ate them. Excuse me. And so we just asked them a simple question: how do you like to eat your eggs? And as a group, then at group time, that was a side little conversation. We posed this question at group time on a big piece of paper, and to help them understand what scrambled was. So again, vocabulary. And what hard-boiled vocabulary, right? New words. I included the images here so they could see the difference and make that connection to if they've had that type of egg before, if they've had it cooked that way. And so we had a whole conversation about this at a group time, and they got exposed to these two new vocabulary words, and then they got to come up and write their name under how they liked their eggs. And then we gave them the option of both. And so you can see that majority of the children wrote both, but then we had a couple over here that liked hard-boiled eggs. They remembered having these and they'd had, you know, they liked it. I was very surprised nobody said scrambled eggs only, but they definitely liked both. And so you can see that this is, these are toddlers, they're beginning to have some emergent writing. And you can see one of our children, she was actually almost 3, was actually able to put her entire name right here. And you see the J-O-J-O. Her name was Josephine, but she went by JoJo. And so she actually was able to write her name. Now it's not perfectly in order from left to right, but she wrote it the best she could. And she knew that it was a J-O, and then she had to write J-O again. So again, this is an entire year though of the children having exposure to this. And you can see these toddlers already starting to form and doing some of this letter work. So again, we did this for everything. We would ask them when we did a planting thing, we asked them which kind, those were the 2 types of seed packets we had. And then we had each child come over, and again, they signed up for which packet they wanted to use. So we did this for everything that we did. We asked them what kind of noodles. We were going to do a cooking project. They wanted to make spaghetti. We had had a whole conversation about it. And so then we posed we posed the question here, and you can't see it. I realized this got messed up. But then we had 4 different of pasta. And again, they got to come up, write their name, and that was their way of voting. So again, any opportunity that we could get them. And then important for them to see their words written. And so we asked, what do you think crickets eat? We had some frogs in our classroom, and we were purchasing crickets to feed them. And then a child, they saw the crickets in the tank, and somebody said, well, what do we feed the crickets? They have to eat too. And we were like, oh, well, okay, let's think about that. So we posed the question to everybody, what do you think crickets eat? And so then we made sure that we wrote everybody's name down, and then we, in quotes, wrote each of their responses. So it's important that they see their language also represented. And we went ahead this time and wrote down what they each said. So again, just other ways of incorporating both language and the use of language and literacy into the classroom. And then these are just some, this last page here is just some more examples of, again, incorporating this in your classroom. So like I said earlier, reading, every attempt to read is really, really important. And you can see you can do it with smaller groups of children, gather all of them, read together. You can do it individually. This is an example, again, of a teacher reading a book, and then there being that enhancement that we talked about. A puppet, in this case, it's on popsicle sticks, images or parts of the story represented, and this child could hold that up and engage and participate in the retelling of the story or the reading of this story and be a part of it, just to get them more interested. And then I did talk about this earlier, and same thing here, writing down. So this is what we did in our classroom all the time. We always had a big board here, or big poster board, post-it paper, where we would ask children questions, and either we would write their responses down so they could see written word taking place, and their words, their language turned into print form. But then also we would give them the opportunity to come up and write and include their writing onto whatever we were asking as well. So lots of different ways to do that, and we changed it up. It was, we tried to do something somewhat different every day, but along those lines. And then labeling of your materials in your classroom. This is also very, very important. Couple of reasons. One, it is related to environmental organization, and management and classroom management. Children need to know where things go, and they need to know where to put things back when you say it's time to clean up. So this is an important part for that, but it's also, again, another opportunity for you to use written word and have it displayed and showed having meaning throughout your classroom. So those toys and things that we're playing with, they have names, and there's, a name for that, crayons and blah, blah, blah. But what does that look like? And so you always want to start out incorporating the picture with the label right underneath it, so children are successful at being able to put things back where they go, but also see print, again, in a meaningful way throughout your classroom. So these are just some examples of this piece. Okay, guys, so that is actually it. And then also in this PowerPoint, we did this in class already, but I went ahead and put it here for you as well. This PowerPoint is listed in your modules, just the PowerPoint, and then of course I'm gonna include this video. But this is the map of those foundations that we went over a few weeks ago, but this is a great reference for you to be able to come back and really reference how to read these foundation page, or these pages inside the foundation book, so you know each of those different parts and where they exist. All right, guys, well, that's it for this lecture on language and literacy development and this developmental domain. We will talk about this more in class, but I won't go in depth because I did a lot of that here. What we're going to do in class is Sarah will be coming over from the preschool. She'll be reading to us, showing us some different props and enhancements that she uses and how they use and incorporate writing into their classroom. We'll be wandering around their center, and then we will be coming back into the room we'll open up those foundation books, start looking at these foundations in each of these different areas that we just went over, and you'll start to develop your lesson plan for language and literacy. So of course you can start and get started on your own, and I really do recommend that, so that when it's to class, I can really get around to help, because so doing this ahead of time, starting to review these types of things and think about some different activities. I gave you a lot of examples in this recording, so I think that that should help you at least in getting started and what you think you want to do. Again, with this lesson plan, the only requirement is that for this lesson plan, you must have a book connected to it, and the foundations must be used from the language and literacy section. But other than that, you can develop your activity however you want, and you're only coming up with one activity. All right, guys, so that's it. I will see you in class. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and it was helpful to do it this way. All right, have a good day. Bye, guys.